Tonight, terror alert. The U.S. warns Americans in Europe to be vigilant when they are in tourist spots and transportation hubs. I'm Russ Mitchell. Also tonight, critical contests. The Kentucky Senate race is a dead heat. Spending and taxes are the big issues, and control of the Senate is at stake. Whatever happened to personal privacy? A young man's suicide highlights the potential danger of social networks and unlimited information. And anniversary gift, the very special donation this man made to save his wife of 52 years.
This is the CBS Evening News with Russ Mitchell.
And good evening. The U.S. government now has an official alert for Americans living or traveling in Europe. After a day of speculation, the State Department today issued a travel alert advising U.S. citizens in Europe to take extra precautions about their personal safety. What does it mean, and how seriously should you take it? We begin our coverage with Elizabeth Palmer in London.
The State Department's warning was echoed by the British government, which raised its threat of terrorist attacks in France and Germany specifically to high.
This reinforces the need for vigilance against the continuing terrorist threat. The threat level against the United Kingdom continues to be assessed as severe, which is not a change, but of course is very serious.
Also this week, Osama bin Laden released 2 new statements. They'll be examined by intelligence agencies in case they contain coded orders to militants. U.S. counterterrorism officials believe senior al-Qaeda leaders may have been planning to attack several European cities, similar to the terrorist assault in Mumbai 2 years ago, when armed men fanned out in the crowded downtown, killing and wounding almost 500 people. Pakistan's border region with Afghanistan is still a haven for al-Qaeda training camps, in spite of stepped-up attacks from U.S. drones and pressure by the Pakistan Army. This summer, Western intelligence agencies were told that militants trained in this area were going to carry out the European attacks. So while today's travel warning is based on serious fears, it's vague, leaving many of the hundreds of thousands of Americans in Europe for business or for pleasure wondering what to make of it.
Yeah, you just got to be aware, and take caution as you can, because you got to go on with your life.
I think we have to be vigilant everywhere, and we've been here for 3 weeks now and really haven't seen any problems, haven't felt unsafe in any way.
The State Department alert does contain one specific warning. It says Americans should be very wary using public transportation systems, which, of course, in the past have been prime targets in other terrorist attacks. Russ?
Palmer in London. Thanks. And for more on the terror alert and what it means, we are joined by CBS News national security analyst Juan Zarate. Juan, good evening.
Good evening, Russ.
I guess the big question is, why now?
Well, Russ, the alert comes at a time when authorities are learning more and more about this al-Qaeda-directed plot at Europe. And so in some ways, the authorities, the U.S. government, has a duty to warn U.S. citizens about this potential threat in Europe. In addition, this comes at a time with a lot of media attention about what we know with respect to the threat. And so the authorities couldn't avoid putting out some sort of advisory to warn people traveling to Europe.
The alert is pretty vague. No specific countries are mentioned. What does that say to you?
Well, it says a couple of things. First, that authorities are still worried about the seriousness of this threat, directed by bin Laden to hit in Europe with assault teams and Mumbai-style attacks. It also suggests that they're worried that this may be evolving. It's not clear what the media coverage has done to change the direction of the plot. And so this is somewhat open-ended and vague, in part because authorities aren't quite sure where this may be headed. So we're right in the middle of trying to understand what this plot means, not only to travelers, but also to counterterrorism officials.
When you look at this alert, how seriously do you think Americans should take it?
Well, I think they should take it seriously in light of what we know about this plot. Again, something directed by bin Laden and al-Qaeda to hit in European cities should not be ignored. At the same time, we shouldn't overreact. There isn't enough information to suggest something's going to happen tomorrow. But it does suggest Americans need to be vigilant and need to be aware of their surroundings when they're traveling to European cities, and just be conscious of the fact that there may be an attack sometime in the future.
CBS News national security analyst Juan Zarate. As always, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Russ.
Suspected militants attacked roughly 20 tanker trucks near Islamabad, Pakistan tonight. as they were preparing to carry oil to NATO and U.S. troops in Afghanistan. Pakistan police say at least 2 people were killed in the attack on the tankers, which reportedly were parked at a poorly guarded terminal. And now to politics. Election Day 2010 is now less than 1 month away, and it has been a very busy weekend of campaigning across the country. One of the critical contests in the fight for control of Congress is in Kentucky, where the U.S. Senate race between a Tea Party Republican and the state's Democratic Attorney General got hotter today as the two squared off in a debate. Congressional correspondent Nancy Cordes has more.
We really have come to take our government back.
Republican Rand Paul describes his Senate race as a referendum on President Obama.
This election's about more than me.
But in many ways, this Kentucky election has been all about Paul. His position at the forefront of the Tea Party movement, and his controversial comments, like his criticism of the historic 1964 Civil Rights Act.
You're looking at all that stands between Rand Paul and the United States Senate.
Democrat Jack Conway, the state attorney general, has positioned himself as the anti-Paul.
He's too risky.
Conway routinely calls Paul radical for arguing, among other things, that environmental and mine safety regulations should be rolled back.
Mine regulations are written in the blood of coal miners, and we have to stand up for them.
Hey, how are you, sir? Good, how are you? I'm Jack Conway. How are you?
And he says there's another key difference.
I mean, I'll sit down here with you and answer your questions. I bet Rand Paul's not going to give you this opportunity.
Paul, a practicing eye doctor, has largely steered clear of the press after getting in hot water early on. In fact, no one with his campaign would give us an interview.
You don't want to answer any questions? No, probably not. Not one. You're the press secretary.
Paul's platform to aggressively shrink the size of government is resonating with Kentucky voters.
And everybody just kind of woke up and said, hey, we're too far in debt. We've got too many things going on. Our government has its hands in too many things.
In their debate today, Paul hammered Conway for supporting the president's health care reform plan and stimulus spending.
Jack acts like the money's for free. Just go and get it from Santa Claus in Washington.
Conway argued the stimulus package helped save 17,000 jobs in Kentucky. But he made it clear he doesn't agree with the president on everything. For example, he favors extending the Bush tax cuts for everyone, including the wealthy.
I'm certainly not going to be to the left of Barack Obama.
Republican leaders initially kept Rand Paul at arm's length, but then he won his primary, beating the candidate favored by his fellow Kentuckian Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. Now, McConnell and the rest are firmly in Paul's corner, because if he does not win, their chances of retaking the Senate are very slim. Russ?
Nancy Cordes in Washington, thank you. Now to California, where the already rough and tumble fight for governor got even nastier this weekend at a debate in Fresno. Hattie Kaufman has the latest on the race and the issue that has moved front and center.
In a heated debate broadcast on Spanish-language television, Meg Whitman accused her opponent, former Governor Jerry Brown, of orchestrating the controversy surrounding her one-time housekeeper, Nikki Diaz-Santillan.
You should be ashamed for sacrificing Nikki Diaz on the altar of your political ambitions.
You have blamed her, blame me, blame the left, blame the unions, but you don't take accountability.
Whitman's campaign has been reeling since Wednesday, when Santillan tearfully told reporters that Whitman knew she was in the U.S. illegally, but kept her on the payroll anyway.
That she knew that. And I don't have papers to work here.
Whitman fired back, releasing these employment documents showing Diaz claimed she was here legally, had a driver's license and a Social Security card.
This is truly a political smear on me, on my family, and based on lies.
But in 2003, Whitman's family received a letter from the government pointing out a problem with Santilla's name and Social Security number. At the bottom, a note that appears to be written by Whitman's husband. At first, Whitman denied receiving any correspondence from the government about her housekeeper's immigration status, even suggesting Santillan may have intercepted the mail. Once the letter surfaced, Whitman backtracked, saying her husband did not remember receiving it. A big problem for Whitman. She's campaigned hard on her stance against hiring undocumented immigrants.
We do have to hold employers accountable for hiring only documented workers.
So far, the former eBay CEO has poured $119 million of her own fortune into her campaign,
Meg Whitman
buying an onslaught of ads on Spanish TV and radio.
I cannot win the governor's race without the Latino vote.
This may thwart
all of the goodwill that she's gained thus far, and she has gained much goodwill in the Latino community. This threatens to undo a lot of that.
Whitman's worry now is whether this tearful allegation...
She treated me as if I was not a human being.
...could do lasting damage to her campaign less than a month before Election Day. Hattie Kaufman, CBS News, Los Angeles.
And this item from our political hot sheet. As expected, former White House Chief of Staff Rahm Emanuel said today he's preparing to run for mayor of Chicago. He made the announcement on his campaign website. 5 days after Rutgers freshman Tyler Clementi jumped to his death, the university is preparing for a silent vigil later this evening. Clementi's death and the events before it are raising tough questions about privacy in this digital age. Jim Axelrod has more.
The tragedy of Tyler Clementi's suicide, from the live streaming of his encounter with another man to his suicide note, unfolded as so much of our lives do now, online.
We're now operating in a kind of free fall. You know, internet gurus say things like privacy is dead, get over it.
The social networking revolution is happening so fast, people may not have had a chance to catch up with the privacy implications.
There is no boundary, you know, it's the whole world. Sure.
Emily Murphy is a 26-year-old high school English teacher. This was her 4.5 years ago, when CBS News did a story about what was then an addictive new web venture called Facebook.
They try to mark themselves as quirky or witty or fun in ways that I wouldn't know just looking at them face to face.
Since we first met Emily Murphy, Facebook has exploded in growth. This past summer, Facebook reached 500 million users. That's 1 out of every 14 people on Earth who now have a Facebook profile. Some projections estimate the number of Facebook users will be 1 billion by next year, which is exactly why Murphy uses Facebook much less now.
That's great, and I know the communication factor is there, but I also feel like there's a part of my life that I want to retain as private.
You never thought that way 4 years ago?
I just know.
The internet's not written in pencil, Mark, it's written in ink.
A new movie, The Social Network, #1 at the box office this weekend, examines larger questions raised by the rise of Facebook and other websites.
Socializing on the internet is to socializing what reality TV is to reality.
Murphy, the teacher, agrees. Do you see this with the kids you teach?
Absolutely. They are so concerned with their digital or online image, and it's a little bit disheartening to think that they put so much stock in how they present themselves, which is clearly can never be a full picture of who they are.
Which might be an important limit in the social networking revolution many think is limitless. Jim Axelrod, CBS News, New York.
And still ahead on tonight's CBS Evening News, civilian or military courts for accused terrorists. This man's case may be the key. A terrorism trial that begins in New York this week could be a crucial test case in the debate over civilian versus military courts. Chief legal correspondent Jan Crawford has more on the case of Ahmed Ghailani.
It was a brazen attack on 2 U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. Powerful truck bombs detonating minutes apart, killing 224 people. Susan Hirsch was a professor working in Tanzania and planning a move back home with her husband, Jamal Abdallah.
It would have been my husband's first trip to the U.S., and we were in the process of buying gifts for people.
They stopped by the embassy in Dar es Salaam to cash a check. Her husband decided to wait outside to have a cigarette.
A huge noise, and then I was knocked to the floor. I have strong memories of a lot of dust and glass on the floor.
Jamal died instantly. Before September 11th, the embassy bombings 12 years ago were al-Qaeda's deadliest assault on Americans. Now, Ahmed Ghailani, who allegedly bought the truck used in the Tanzania attack and some of the TNT, will stand trial before a jury in a U.S. courtroom.
He was an important facilitator in the attack.
In 2001, Paul Butler prosecuted 4 other men convicted for the embassy bombings and now serving life sentences. At the time, Ghailani was one of several fugitives in the case. He was captured in Pakistan in 2004 and later held at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. He is the first high-value Guantanamo detainee brought to the U.S. for a civilian trial. The Obama administration points to his trial as proof that top al-Qaeda suspects, like alleged 9/11 mastermind Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, can be brought to justice in federal court. But going forward, this former prosecutor disagrees.
In 1998, when these attacks occurred, the enemy was at war with us, but we just didn't realize it. And we didn't have the tools and the authorities to go after them using military means. All that changed after 9/11.
For Butler, who went on to work at the Pentagon, winning convictions should take a back seat to stopping future attacks.
Just because we can try them in a federal court, we should ask ourselves, should we? Is that the right method to further the actual goal of gathering the intelligence that's necessary to disrupt clandestine cells?
But for Susan Hirsch, Golani's trial for the attack that killed her husband has enormous symbolic value.
The trial is a way of coming back and saying, we can rely on rule of law.
How it plays out could affect whether more trials like it occur. Jan Crawford, CBS News, Washington.
As floodwaters began to recede across eastern North Carolina today, Governor Beverly Perdue toured the town of Windsor and said the flood damage was as bad as that following 1999's Hurricane Floyd. And we'll be back. Germany today marked the 20th anniversary of the reunification of East and West. Germany's president said Germany must do a better job of integrating Muslims and other immigrants. His audience included East German-born Chancellor Angela Merkel. In San Francisco Bay, the octopus is pretty hard to miss. The super yacht, owned by Microsoft co-owner Paul Allen, is more than 400 feet long. It has a swimming pool, 2 helicopters, and 2 submarines, and it costs $20 million a year just to maintain. And one of the most popular shows in the history of television debuted 50 years ago today.
Whoa, wait a minute there, Dick.
The Andy Griffith Show ran for 8 years here on CBS. It was never out of the top 10 and went out as number 1 back in 1968. Look, there's Andy and Barney. But Mayberry and its catchy theme lives on in reruns. There's Opie and Barney, actually. Coming up at tonight's CBS Evening News, the man who gave his wife the greatest anniversary gift of all. Finally this Sunday, how far would you be willing to go to save the life of the person closest to you? Cynthia Bowers tells us about a Chicago man who knew right away how he would answer that question, and now so do we.
It was hot, hot and sultry.
For Frank and Jane Whitecotton, it wasn't the I-do's, but rather the heat they remember most about their wedding day.
She's a nice-looking young lady. Still is.
3 children and 5 grandkids later, their love still burns.
August 9th, 1958.
Frank promised to take care of Jane in both sickness and in health. This year, he proved it.
My kidneys were like Swiss cheese.
In 1980, Jane was diagnosed with polycystic kidney disease. PKD is a hereditary disorder in which cysts grow on the kidneys. More than 12 million people suffer from it worldwide. As she aged, the disease worsened.
It progressed to the point where your kidneys are not functioning properly.
Jane needed a transplant. Frank was a match, but doctors rejected him because of his blood pressure, weight, and age. Nearly 85,000 Americans are awaiting kidney transplants, and only 17,000 operations were performed last year.
There's more than 4,000 patients dying per year.
For Jane, time was running out. So over the next several years, Frank worked hard to lower his blood pressure and lose weight.
I says, "What, Doc?" I said, I bent over and touched the floor with my hands, and he says, "Well, I can't do that, so you ought to be okay." So he went ahead and said he'd take me.
And on August 9th, 2010, their 52nd wedding anniversary, Frank gave his wife a kidney at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. He is the oldest donor on record.
Is there any way, Frank, to express how good this made you feel?
It's just something that, you help somebody. And there's a lot of people that need the help.
How much does it mean to you, this gift of life?
Oh, a lot. It's my angel.
And there's no better gift than putting together a new chapter of memories. Cynthia Bowers, CBS News, Chicago.
Wow. That is the CBS Evening News. Later on CBS 60 Minutes. Thanks for joining us this Sunday evening. I'm Russ Mitchell, CBS News in New York. Katie will be here tomorrow. Good night.
On television, online, on the go, and now free on iPad. CBS News.